Hi, I'm Brian E. Denton, author of the book A Year of War and Peace and the poetry collection Inspiration. Welcome to my channel. This video is another video I'm doing in a series of videos on Dante's Divine Comedy. The idea for these videos was born from Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante Project, wherein Baylor University proposes to cultivate a global readership of Dante's Divine Comedy and go through the entire epic poem at a rate of 3 cantos or chapters per week. I think this is a great idea, and this is my independent contribution to it. We're doing this, by the way, in honor of the 700th year anniversary of the great poem. So, if this is your first time watching a video, I ask you to please like the video and to subscribe to the channel. I've set myself the goal of trying to get to 150 subscribers by the end of September, and I think we can get there together if you help me out. So thanks in advance for that. Each video in this series consists of 3 parts. This introduction here, and then the second part will include a synopsis where I'll go over the main plot, characters, and themes, and then I'll conclude with what I call the takeaways, which is my personal analysis of each canto. And with that, let's get right into it. Dante's Inferno, Canto 7. Plutus, the classical world's god of wealth, opens up this canto by issuing some threatening nonsense words, which only Virgil seems to understand. And once again, Virgil tells Dante that they have nothing to worry about whatsoever from this beast of hell. Virgil then commands Plutus to back down because their journey has been sanctioned from on high. And indeed, Plutus does back down. And with that, our heroes descend down into the 4th ring of hell. Here, they find a collection of sinners larger than any collection of sinners they found so far in their journey. And there appears to be 2 types of sinners down here, each of them Sisyphus-like, pushing around huge burdens and running into each other constantly and yelling at each other. One side in this conflict screams at the other side that they are hoarding, and then that side in turn screams back that they are squandering. This nasty interaction is one continuous, never-ending cycle, and once again Dante the Pilgrim says that he is pained by looking at all this misery. So he asks Virgil, who are all these people, and is it true as it appears to be that most of them are clerics? And Virgil responds, yes, indeed they are mostly clerics. So here, Dante the poet, he's gone full Emile Zola in his anti-clericalism. Further, Virgil tells Dante that the 2 groups collected down here being punished are those who committed avarice and prodigality in their earthly life, and that these 2 groups are damned to commit this same collision over and over again for all of eternity. Next, Virgil tells Dante the Pilgrim something very important that he'll develop over the course of a few triplets, and that essentially is this: that capital F Fortune makes a mockery of the goods that we trust with her and toil to obtain. Dante the Pilgrim then asks, who is this Fortune that Virgil speaks of? And Virgil responds by launching into an absolutely fantastic impassioned discourse on the role of fortune in human affairs. The upshot basically is that Fortune, the classical pagan god of luck, is actually a divine agent of the Christian God, and that the Christian God's seemingly arbitrary and capricious distribution of worldly goods is actually a transcendent wisdom beyond the capabilities of human wit. After this speech, Virgil tells Dante the Pilgrim that they must now descend down into the 5th ring of hell. And once down here, they find that the river they've been following dumps out into the swamp of Styx. Here in this bog, Dante the Pilgrim notices that there are legions of bodies, and they're all writhing around in the disgusting mud, striking at each other, and tearing each other to pieces with their teeth. These fighting shades, Virgil tells Dante the Pilgrim, are those damned souls who during their earthly life were overcome by anger. He then directs the gaze of Dante to the surface of the bog, which is simmering with this constant flow of bubbles, and he tells Dante that these are actually the eternal seething screams of those angry souls who are trapped eternally submerged under the bog. And on that happy note, our 2 heroes continue on. They circle around the angry bog until they come at last to a tower. The first thing you need to know about the sinners collected in this ring of hell, aside from Plutus, is that they are all unnamed. They are undifferentiated. This hasn't happened before in hell. Remember that the neutral angels, who were unnamed and undifferentiated, they were not in hell. They came before hell. In Limbo, of course, we met a lot of names, and we recognized almost all of them because they were the great names of world history in terms of the liberal arts and the humanities. And then in the 2nd ring of hell, you'll recall, I'm sure, poor Francesca and her lover Paolo. And then in the 3rd ring of hell, we met Chaco. But here, no one is named. And this is entirely appropriate given the sins being punished. Remember that in the 4th ring of hell, the sins being punished are avarice and prodigality. So in their earthly life, these sinners attempted to distinguish themselves from others, either through hoarding massive amounts of wealth or through the ostentatious spending of wealth. Here in hell, however, they remain an undifferentiated mass. Yes, Virgil does tell Dante the Pilgrim that there are clerics here in hell, but he doesn't name any of these clerics. And in fact, in later cantos, he will name some of the clerics, and some of these will actually be popes. But for now, just remember that none of the clerics here are named. The same anonymity extends to the centers of anger that are located in the fifth ring of hell. I don't know what to make of this, why they too remain unnamed and undifferentiated. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And that brings us to the only named character in the canto, Plutus. Plutus, of course, is the classical world's god of wealth. And there are two things that I'd like to talk about in terms of Plutus. The first thing is that string of nonsense words that Plutus spits out at our heroes to open the canto. There's been centuries-long debate on what these words mean, or even if they belong to a recognizable language. In this respect, Plutus's words remind me of the Quranic huruf muqatat. Now, for those of you who don't know, huruf muqatat means disconnected letters. And so I guess the best possible way to explain what huruf muqatat is to say that the Quran is divided into surahs, and 29 of these surahs begin with huruf muqatat, disconnected letters. And scholars have no idea what these letters mean. They appear to be nonsense. Similar in that respect to Plutus's words that open this canto. Islamic scholars, like Dante's scholars, have debated the meaning of these words for centuries, and like I said, there's been no general consensus as to what they mean. Now, I have nothing to say about huruf muqatat or these nonsense words of Plutus, other than to say that whenever I read either of them, I'm reminded of the other. Just to be clear here, though, Dante scholars argue that Plutus's words are some odd, strange combination of various languages. That's not what's going on with huruf muqatat. With huruf muqatat, they're just a series of letters. Still, the fact is that there's no scholarly consensus as to either what Plutus's words mean or what huruf muqatat means. And furthermore, no one ever in the history, so far as I know, has even brought up the similarities between the two. And probably for good reason. It probably means nothing. It's just something that I personally think about when either I read Dante or the Quran. Real quick though, we haven't seen the last of this nonsense language. And in fact, it appears again in Canto 7 of Paradise. Canto 7. Note that. We're in Canto 7 today in Inferno, and then Dante is going to bring back this nonsense language again in Canto 7 of Paradise. So once again, we see Dante working with very careful craft and symmetry in his great poem, The Divine Comedy. Pretty smart, Dante. The second thing I'd like to talk about concerning Plutus is that he's really not a threat at all to our characters. And in fact, all that Virgil has to do is remind him that Saint Michael had destroyed the rebellious angels, and this just sends Plutus off cowering. We saw similar things with the demons who are guarding other parts of hell. We had Cerberus. All Virgil had to do was just throw some disgusting mud at him, and he chewed on it and went away. So what I'm getting at here is that this epic poem, it's really not much of an action-adventure in the traditional sense because there's been no real physical threat to our heroes at all. All the villains are easily dispensed with. So when you read the Divine Comedy, think of it not so much as an action-adventure story, but as a spiritual adventure story. Because the real threat to these characters, or at least Dante the Pilgrim, is not a physical threat. It's a spiritual threat. The first takeaway from this canto is that Dante the poet includes prodigality as a sin to be punished alongside of avarice. Now, avarice, as I'm sure you know, is one of the 7 deadly sins according to the Christian tradition, but prodigality is not. I think it's pretty clear that what Dante the poet is arguing here for is a type of Aristotelian golden mean as it pertains to wealth management. Dante the poet would advocate for balancing between excessive hoarding of wealth on the one hand and excessive spending of it on the other. I like this idea of Dante as personal wealth management guru. There's a book idea here. The second takeaway from this canto is Dante's treatment of anger. I love it. I mean, you got the frenzied jostling on the one hand and the suffocating submerged screams down in the bog on the other. These are really just the perfect metaphors for the unreasoning madness that is anger. If we as readers are to avoid the fate of these damned souls, then we must learn to avoid their transgressions. We must learn to curb our anger. The first step is to define anger so we know who the enemy is. Now, for my money, the greatest treatise ever written on anger is De Ira by Seneca, the philosopher. Now, De Ira is a book, or rather it's a series of letters that Seneca wrote to his older brother in order to help his older brother overcome his problem with anger. Here's how Seneca defines anger in De Ira. A man may think himself injured, may wish to avenge his wrongs, and then may be persuaded by some reason or other to give up his intention and calm down. I do not call that anger. It is an emotion of the mind which is under the control of reason. Anger is that which goes beyond reason and carries her away with it. Wherefore the first confusion of a man's mind when struck by what seems an injury is no more anger than the apparent injury itself. It is the subsequent mad rush, which not only receives the impression of the apparent injury, but acts upon it as true. That is anger, being an exciting of the mind to revenge, which proceeds from choice and deliberate resolve. There never has been any doubt that fear produces flight, and anger a rush forward. Consider, therefore, whether you suppose that anything can be either sought or avoided without the participation of the mind. So here, anger isn't mere frustration, which is a natural response to being injured or insulted by someone. Rather, Seneca says that anger is the carrying away of one's emotions coupled with a desire for revenge or violence. For Seneca, this is to be avoided at all costs. And in part 3 of his De Ira, he has a lot of good advice for those of us who wish to curb this hateful emotion and avoid the awful fate that awaits those punished for the sin of anger in Dante's Inferno. I'd suggest reading the entire book for yourself because it's a classic, it's well worth reading, and remember that Dante the poet includes Seneca and Limbo, where all the noble pagan souls are gathered together. So if he's good enough for Dante, he's good enough for you. Now, when I feel myself getting angry, and I can sense that anger is starting its assault upon my reason, I recall this quote from Seneca. "No one will postpone his anger, yet delay is the best remedy for it, because it allows its first glow to subside, and gives time for the cloud which darkens the mind either to disperse, or at any rate to become less dense. Of these wrongs, which drive you frantic, some will grow lighter after an interval, not of a day, but even of an hour. Some will vanish altogether. Even if you gain nothing by your adjournment, still what you do after it will appear to be the result of mature deliberation, not of anger. If you want to find out the truth about anything, commit the task to time. Nothing can be accurately discerned at a time of disturbance." My final takeaway for Canto 7 is Virgil's speech about the role of fortune in human affairs. This is absolutely one of my favorite parts of the entire Divine Comedy. The upshot of his speech is that fortune's work through God's command is beyond feeble human understanding. I feel that the idea expressed in these few stanzas is something that all, the religious and the secular humanist alike, can benefit from thinking about. What these lines teach us is that mankind should approach all subjects with epistemic humility. We are simply not as smart as we like to think we are. Even geniuses like us reading Dante for fun on YouTube. Epistemic humility is the idea that human understanding is limited, provisional, and subject to constant revision. In fact, human understanding is so circumscribed, particularly as it applies to complex systems, that it behooves all of us to act with the utmost modesty when negotiating with such systems. So the takeaway here is that we should frequently recall Virgil's admonishment that it is extremely difficult, if not outright impossible, to fully understand fortune's role in human affairs. If we can do this and maintain a healthy dose of epistemic humility without degrading down into epistemic nihilism, then we can avoid many of the fates punished in Dante's Inferno. And with that, fellow readers, I conclude this section with another quote from our old friend Tristram Shandy. "But mark, madam, we live amongst riddles and mysteries. The most obvious things which come in our way have dark sides, which the quickest sight cannot penetrate into. And even the clearest and most exalted understandings amongst us find ourselves puzzled and at a loss in almost every cranny of nature's works." All right, that concludes my video for Canto 7 of Dante's Inferno. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did like the video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Remember that I'm trying to get up to 150 subscribers by the end of September. I think at the time of recording right now, I'm at 128. So with your help, I think we can get there. Thanks a lot. More importantly than liking the video and subscribing to the channel, however, is getting a conversation going on this poem. So To that end, I'd invite you all to leave a message down in the comments below. Let me know your personal opinion on the canto, on the poem as a whole, or even your opinion on my opinion. In particular, I'm interested in a few points. Number one, what do you think of Dante's inclusion of prodigality as a sin to be punished in hell? Why do you think Dante is deviating here from traditional Christian teaching on this topic? Number two, do you think Dante is making progress here, getting acclimated to the climes of hell? I mean, after all, he didn't pass out this time. Progress. And finally, three, how would you describe the contrapasso in this canto? Remember that in this canto, we visited both the fourth ring of hell and the fifth ring of hell. In the fourth ring of hell, just to remind you, we had the people who committed the sins of avarice and prodigality. And in the fifth ring of hell, we had those who committed the sin of anger. So what's the contrapasso for all these groups? If you'd like to contact me, you can do so on Twitter at Brian E. Denton. And other than that, in closing, I'd just like to say thanks for joining me once again. And if this is your first time, welcome. We'll be posting these videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So the next video is going to be on Friday. Until then, take care of yourselves and others. All Virgil has to do is remind Plutus that Saint Michael, the archangel, is he isosceles or acute?